All right. All right.
And
All right. Well, let's get started. It's a few minutes past 5. Other people will join us in due time, but got a great lecture ahead of us. So welcome to the 5th of our monthly lectures that Protect Our Past brings to you. I'm Ellen Briggs, the founder and president of Protect Our Past. We're a nonprofit organization based in Chatham, but we are coalition-wide for the Cape and Islands. So we cover the Cape and the Islands, and our focus is to slow down and stop the demolition of historic structures so we don't lose the charm and the quaintness and the brand, the Cape Cod and Islands brand. Our historic treasures are disappearing way too fast. So we have set a date for a fundraiser, June 17th through June 24th. It's an online auction, and it's focused on having historical experiences, not just having things, but historic experiences. And I will give you a sneak peek. I just got off the phone with David Whedon, and he's going to put forth an auction item to have a personal tour with him at the meeting house, at the visitor center, within all of their wonderful artifacts. And it'll be just you and David Whedon. You're going to have a wonderful time. So that's going to be an auction item, but there'll be many more exciting ones as well. So there will be more details to follow. And we thank the members who have joined us tonight. We so appreciate your donation of $19 or more, and invite anyone who's not a member to do so. Just go to our website, protectourpast.org, and become a member of POP so we can protect our past together. We appreciate you joining us tonight with our lecture. It is by Ron Petersen, who is the chairman of the Orleans Historic Commission. And he has served there for 7 years, but he's done many more things. He has a real passion for history. And as a result, he's served on the Orleans Community Preservation Committee. He's been co-chair of the Orleans Historical Markers Committee and chair of the Attack on Orleans. And I wonder how many of you know that in 1918, a U-boat attacked Orleans. Well, he's an expert on that as well. And he majored in history at the University of Bridgeport, did graduate work at in history at Connecticut College. And though he had a 40-year professional career not related to history, he has jumped back into supporting his passion in Orleans. And he writes a monthly column for the Cape Codder. Be sure and look for that, as well as he often does lectures, as he is doing one tonight. So we are excited that Ron is doing that for us tonight. I want to point out that if you have questions, we invite you to write them in the chat feature of this website. And also note that we're recording this lecture. Just think you all should know that. And we ask you please to mute yourselves, because any interference makes it very difficult for Ron. So Ron, we are excited to learn what you have to share with us. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Ellen. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of this lecture series that Protect Our Past is conducting. And I thank you for all that you do to support historic preservation on the Cape. What I'd like to do tonight is to provide an overview of the state of historic preservation in the town of Orleans, the somewhat disturbing direction that it's going in, and what the Orleans Historical Commission is doing to try to hopefully put it on a better path. And I will move into the screen sharing at this point. And there we go. I see historic preservation as probably one of the most bottom-up functions in our society today, as well it should be. Nothing of any substance gets done or is going to happen without public support that's both very broad and very deep. It's all about winning hearts and minds. That's really the core of historic preservation. In my experience, it's very hard to gain support for preserving a building just because it's old. It gets much easier if there's a broad understanding of the town and the region's history and how a particular building fits into that history and how it contributes to the community character of either Orleans or any other given community. That's the approach that we take on the Historical Commission, and that's the approach that I'll take tonight. Just a word about our history in Orleans. Our town seal says that we were founded in 1797, but our history didn't begin there. It didn't begin in 1644 when a group of 49 pilgrims from Plymouth moved up here to establish Nauset, the settlement of Nauset. There were 49 individuals and 7 families, but that wasn't the beginning of our history, nor was the arrival of the Mayflower the beginning of our history. The history of the land that became Orleans began, archaeologists tell us, about 12,000 years ago. There was a vibrant civilization already here when the English colonists arrived. And we too often forget that. What we have on the slide is a map that was drawn by the French explorer Samuel de Champlain. He sailed into the Nauset estuary in 1605 and spent several days here exploring the area. And he drew this map and he wrote extensively about his visit. He describes a very vibrant, well-organized society with very sophisticated agricultural practices. As you look at this map, the Orleans side would be to the left and the Eastham side would be to the right. And the residents that you see on the map, you'll see the little houses, the Indian Witus. Those are the earliest known contemporary drawings of historic buildings in Orleans that I'm aware of. We obviously can't preserve those at this point, but those are our earliest historic structures, and we're indebted to Champlain for his contemporary account of what existed here before us. And it's interesting to note that Nauset Heights in 1644, that area which is off to the left of this map, was reserved to the native Nauset tribe for them to continue their farming activities after the settlement of Nauset was established. This was 15 years, though. This map was made 15 years before the Mayflower arrived. It's an important part of our history, and one that's very often, too often, left out of the story. So we need to remember this part of our history. Moving along to existing buildings, the house that you see on the screen is known as Orleans's oldest house. It was built in 1723 or thereabouts, and it existed for 74 years before Orleans was incorporated as a town. This land was still part of an English colony. And a little known fact, Orleans still has nearly 50 structures that were built before 1797, a feature of our town that we often promote here. The house was initially occupied by several generations of the Snow family, who were descendants of Orleans's first English residences. Nicholas Snow and his wife Constance Hopkins Snow, who was a Mayflower passenger. But as they say in the infomercials, but wait, there's more. There's a lot more historical significance to this house. In 1644, when the Pilgrims established their settlement in Nauset, the first thing they did, being good Puritan separatists, they built a meeting house. And when this house was built in 1723, timbers from that meeting house were used in the construction of the house. Um, so it has some really extreme historic significance. And the marker that you see um, on the right-hand side of the screen is an effort by a previous generation. In 1976, the Orleans Bicentennial Commission noted the significance of this site with one of their historic markers. So here's a case, our earliest house, that really, I think, depicts in very graphic terms the relationship between our history and our built environment, our structures that still remain, and why it's important to preserve them. And this house, I'm happy to say, is still standing. There are no known threats to it at this point. Many people ask, why does Orleans have a French name? On Cape Cod, most of the towns have names that were named after English villages. Orleans has a French name. Well, it's because of the gentleman on the screen, Isaac Snow, who's known as our Revolutionary War patriot. He was born in 1759. He enlisted as a teenager in the Continental Army in 1776, went to Boston and participated in the siege of Boston. And then he enlisted in what was then the Navy. The Navy was really a collection of private vessels, but he enlisted on a ship that was captured by the British, and he served 22 months in prisons in Plymouth, England, and on a prison ship in Lisbon, Portugal. He escaped twice, and on his way home, he spent some time near Orleans, France, and became familiar with the Duke of Orleans, who was a very freedom-loving individual, very strong supporter of the American Revolution, and later participated in the French Revolution, where he was actually executed during the Reign of Terror. But Isaac made his way back to the United States and to Orleans, where he had a very successful career as a shoemaker and a grist mill owner, partial owner of the grist mill. And in 1797, when the legislation was passed to incorporate Orleans, to separate it from Eastham, a committee was formed to pick a name for the town, and Isaac Snow was appointed to the committee, and he was the one who suggested Orleans, and that was the name that we have today. The pro-French sentiment in this country was still very strong in 1797, out of gratitude towards their support for the revolution. And again, the good news, still standing after all these years. On the right, you see Isaac Snow's birthplace. The house still stands on Brick Hill Road. You'll see, and this is important, you'll see changes to the house. Obviously, those dormers were added. You can't see it on this shot, but there's skylights on the back of the house. Changes that have been made as people's lifestyles changed. We see nothing wrong with that in Orleans. We're not strict preservationists. We don't look to make everything into a museum set piece. I think it's important to document how people's lifestyles change over the years, and this is an example. We'll have more as time goes on, but Isaac Snow lived until 1856. He died at age 97. And he's one of the very few veterans of the Revolutionary War to ever have been photographed. That picture of him on the previous slide was a photograph, not a painting. So he's one of our uh, leading historical citizens, and we're very pleased and proud that his birthplace is still standing after all these years. This is a really interesting house. The house that we're talking about, the Kenrick-Sparrow house, is the house that's a little bit in the background on the left of the slide. Um, the the house is basically a history book of early Orleans. It's the only way to put it. I spent a lot of time in this house, and the history and the heritage, and it just vibrated in the walls. It's very difficult to explain. It was, and the photograph is circa 1930s, somewhere in the 1930s. The building in the foreground is the old South Orleans post office and general store, and I'll mention that again. But the house was built around 1800, maybe 3 years after we were incorporated. And its first occupant was John Kenrick, who was born in 1781. He married Rebecca Sparrow, which began the dual family lineage of the house. But John had gone to sea as a very young man, as a teenager. And he actually rose in stature in his maritime career, and he was given his first command at age 23 as master of the Primrose. And he had 7 additional commands after that before he retired from his maritime career. He returned to Orleans, where he began new careers in salt making, farming, as an arboriculturist and as an arboriculturalist. The Kenrick Woods, which basically surround his house, you can see bits of it in the background, are conservation lands in Orleans that stands in tribute to Kenrick's dedication to refoliating the Cape, which the British had pretty much defoliated when we were their colony in support of their shipbuilding business. But John Kenrick was one of the leaders that during the War of 1812, the blockading British fleet demanded ransoms of all the towns that bordered on Cape Cod Bay. Orleans was one that refused to pay the ransom, and Kenrick was one of the town leaders that was involved in that decision. And Kenrick was also on the rolls of the militia that mobilized and went to Rock Harbor to repel the British landing party. Ellen mentioned that Orleans was attacked by the Germans in 1918. We were also attacked by the British in 1814. I don't know of any other towns in the country that have been attacked twice by foreign powers in our nation's war. But Kenrick went on to serve as a selectman for 13 years. He was representative to the General Court, which we now call the legislature. He and Rebecca were among the founders of the Orleans Baptist Church, and later in the organization of the Universalist Church, where he served as a lay preacher until his death. His son, John, also became a teacher at age 19, served 25 years on the Orleans School Board. He was superintendent of schools in the 1880s. He owned and operated the South Orleans store, which became the post office, which you see in the foreground on the slide. He also served as a selectman. He was the town assessor. He was overseer of the poor. He was a state representative, a member of the governor's council, a justice of the peace, and a trustee of Cape Cod 5. And the lineage went on through the Sparrow family, but I think you can see that just about every thread of our history runs through through this house. Let's see. There's the Kenrick House as it appeared in January of 2019. It was demolished. The Historic Commission fought the good fight to try to save it. We imposed the demolition delay, but it was to no avail. And it was during that year that the demolition delay was in effect that I and some other members of the commission spent a lot of time inside the house. The owner actually gave us the key so we could bring specialists in to look at it. And it was chilling to be in there. The walls vibrated with the history. And you could just feel our seafaring history, our agricultural history, our civic history, our educational history, our war participation, our ecclesiastical history, and our educational history, all wrapped up in the bones of that house. And now it's gone. And this is part of a trend that I think is very concerning, not only in Orleans. I know other towns are dealing with this issue as well. Here's another example. The Alice Hanvey House. This house was demolished in early 2020. But this is a very unique picture because you can see the old and the new together. The Hanvey House, the white structure on the left, was built in 1810. Again, just 13 years after we were incorporated. It was basically a farmhouse and included a barn. It was purchased, the property was purchased by an out-of-state corporation that intended from the beginning to demolish the Hanvey House and to establish a luxury short-term rental facility. That building that you see, the green building that's going up, sleeps 22 people and it has 9 bathrooms. The owner discovered, or else he probably discovered before he bought the property, that the lot was large enough that he could begin the construction of his new house before demolishing the old one. So that's why we have this unique picture side by side of the two buildings. It's the old and the new. And we hope that the building on the left is not what Orleans is becoming, but and we're working as hard as we can to prevent that. There's a bit of good news. There was a barn on the property, and during this process, an Orleans citizen came forward and offered to move at his own expense, move the barn and to restore it on his own property in another part of town to replace a historic barn that he had lost. So that was the little bit of good news that accompanied this what we consider tragic demolition. Here's another example. This was a building that was demolished in early 2020. The Willis Snow House. It was built about in 1860. And it was associated with not only the Snow family, but also the Mayo and the Linnell families, very prominent families in our history. Willis Snow was the shipwreck commissioner in Orleans in the mid part of the 19th century. Shipwrecks were a big part of our heritage in Orleans, as with most Cape towns. And Willis, as the wreck commissioner, when a ship wrecked off the coast of Orleans, would supervise the salvage and handle the many insurance issues that came up. But you see on the slide on the left what the property looked like in early 2020. Oh, just a few other examples of the direction Orleans is going. On the left, you see the old Shattuck House, which was Orleans's grand old hotel. It's fairly near the railroad depot and was a very prominent building in town. And on the right, you see what it looks like today. It's a gas station and a convenience store. Um, an example on Main Street where our efforts are currently um, focused. You see on the left the Calvin Snow House. Calvin Snow was born, raised, and grew up in Orleans. He ended up going to Chicago, where he was one of the pioneers in Chicago's meatpacking industry. Um, he became very wealthy out there. He retired, came back to Orleans, and built this house. After the house passed out of the Snow family, it became the initial location of the Southward Inn, which moved up to its permanent location, which was further up closer to town. But that happened during around World War I. But the Orleans Masons organization bought it, and they used the house as their lodge up until the 1970s, when it was demolished. And you see on the right what the property looks like today. Again, I think this is all intended to demonstrate the direction that Orleans is headed in. Here's a kind of picture's worth a thousand words photograph. The marker in the front denotes the original location of Higgins Tavern, which was an iconic inn, stagecoach house, and tavern. It was the place where Henry David Thoreau stopped for the night during his 1849 walk across Cape Cod, which resulted in the classic book of its name. But I think that this photo really depicts the fragility of our heritage and our history. And one would have to wonder what a visitor would think reading that marker and then looking at what exists behind it today. Not that there's anything wrong with gas stations, but it's not an iconic historic inn. And that's, it's just an example. Our heritage and our history is finite, it's perishable. Once it's gone for good. And it's a slippery slope. We lose we lose touch with our history and our heritage, one building at a time, one artifact at a time, one story at a time. It disappears sometimes incrementally, and we don't notice it until it's too late. And we're hoping in Orleans that it's not too late. This is a newly threatened building, the Longhouse, built in 1795. Again, one of the buildings built before Orleans became incorporated. This building is a perfect example of what we in the historic preservation business call repurposing. Or adaptive reuse. During its lifetime, this building was a private residence, it was a tavern, it was a retail shop, and it's currently an art gallery. And I think you can see from the photograph, it's in fairly good shape. The owner filed an application to demolish it. The Historic Commission imposed the demolition delay on it, so this building is biding its time at this point. Interesting that the records show that the building was a tavern during the War of 1812, and one can well imagine the Orleans militia, after repelling the British invasion at Rock Harbor, that some of them may not have repaired to this tavern after the battle to unwind a bit. Kind of a fantasy vision, I guess, that I have. This house is also under demolition delay at this point. It's on Beach Road, the Josiah Cole House. I expect that before the end of this year, we'll see this building gone. That brings us to Main in East Orleans, and we are looking at this in a sense as being our last best hope. It's our largest historic streetscape remaining in town. It's 1.2 miles in length. It runs from Methodist Church at the Route 28 intersection down to the Barley Neck Inn, where the road forks in two directions. There are 47 historic properties on the street. And historically, it was the center of town in the 19th century, particularly the early 19th century. It was the institutional, the cultural, the civic, and the ecclesiastical center of town. That all started to change when the railroad came in and the railroad depot was built. And it remains relatively intact and well preserved. And to demonstrate that, I'm just going to quickly run through some photos. We're indebted to the great photographer H.K. Cummings, who basically preserved a lot of Orleans history during his career in the late 1800s. You see here the Doane House was built in 1885. This is how it looked on the left in 1889 when Cummings photographed it. And on the right, you see how it looks today. Again, you see changes. There are some skylights built in. The structure's changed a little bit. But again, we consider this to be historically preserved, and the changes document the changes in the way people lived over the years. Here's another one, the Meyers House, built in 1850. On the left is how it looked in 1890, and on the right is how it looks today. Very well preserved. Another example of just, I can't read the top of my notes here. The Eldridge small house built in 1850. Here's how it looked in 1888 and how it looks today. So there's some differences and you can see there, but you can still see that it does preserve its historic character. The Leander Crosby house, again, same thing, built in 65. This is how it looked in 1893 and how it looks today. This is one of my personal favorites. Leander Crosby was a very prominent citizen in our town, was a representative to the state legislature. And the earliest recorded shipwreck in Cape Cod history occurred in the waters off Orleans in 1626 when the Sparrowhawk sunk. The remains of the Sparrowhawk surfaced in 1863, and Crosby was one of the leading citizens that engaged in recovering the remains of the Sparrowhawk and sending them to Boston, where it was reassembled, and it sat on Boston Common for many years. But for a while, the remains of the Sparrowhawk were in the backyard of this house. Again, the Hurd House, 1893 and today. The current owner of this house went to great lengths to accurately preserve this house. You can see the detail on the railings between the two photos. He reproduced very accurately and faithfully some of the features of this house. Again, the Doane House, the Seth Doane House. Um, so that's a picture of Main Street. Our philosophy on the Historical Commission is that we um, can't preserve everything, and we shouldn't preserve everything. Time moves on, and progress occurs, and historic preservationists sometimes get the rap of being anti-progress. We believe that historic preservation, if it's judiciously applied, can promote, guide, and encourage the development of our community. And I think Lowell, Massachusetts is probably the textbook example of that, where the rejuvenation of that city was based on the historic preservation of their waterfront and the many mills and other buildings in that town. So we're looking at selectively and judiciously preserving those structures and those areas that represent and elucidate our history. What tools do we have now to preserve history in Orleans and to preserve historical buildings? We only have a demolition delay bylaw. And that bylaw, through that bylaw, we can delay the demolition of a building for 1 year. We can't prevent demolition, and I think objectively speaking, it's had fairly negligible effectiveness in preserving our history. Most buildings that come up for demolition where we impose the bylaw, most of them have ended up being demolished anyway. There's been a year delay. We hope that the deterrent effect perhaps keeps some developers out of town, knowing that they'll have to wait a year. But the demolition bylaw is it. That's all we have right now. So what is the answer? How do we? Let's see. What do we do to preserve what we have left, and in particular to preserve Main Street? This is an old postcard that shows Main Street back in the horse and buggy days. The Episcopal Church, or the Methodist Church, which still stands, is on the right, and then on the left is you can see the very edge of Academy Place. The historic district is a tool that is available to towns in Massachusetts. It's been available for over 60 years, and over 120 cities and towns in Massachusetts have established historic districts to protect their historic resources. Orleans is one of only 2 towns on the Cape that has never established its own local historic district. Most towns on the Cape have established several. We do have the Old Kings Highway District in town, which wasn't established locally. That's a regional district, and the folks on the Orleans Kings Highway District Commission do a great job preserving history in that section of town. In 1996, an effort was made to establish Main Street in East Orleans as a local historic district, and it failed at town meeting by a fairly substantial margin. And in the early 2000s, there was an effort made to get it listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but that project was abandoned fairly early on. What would happen if we had a historic district? The Historic District Commission, which would be established pursuant to this, would be able to review and prevent demolition of historic buildings, not just delay, but prevent. It could also prevent modifications that would alter the historic streetscape, and it could also regulate new construction. Other considerations, the regulations would apply only to modifications that are visible from a public way. We're looking to establish a kind of a light touch with historic districts. We don't anticipate that it would include regulations that would apply to details such as paint colors and the details of windows and landscaping and fences. We're in view of the history of past efforts and the demographics of our town at this point, we're really looking to take a light touch and to not make this an onerous, intrusive type of a district. If we can prevent demolitions from occurring on Main Street, we consider that to be a huge win. So where are we today? What have we done? We've studied to death the options for establishing historic districts. It took about 2 years to do that. And we settled on the architectural conservation district model as our approach, which is a lighter touch than the local historic district. And we've engaged in a very extensive public education effort to try to address some of the issues I mentioned earlier about relating history to preservation. We have had monthly columns in the Cape Codder newspaper. In 2019, we had 3 public presentations, public meetings where we discussed the importance of historic preservation to our town. They were very well attended. We had a 4th scheduled for early 2020, but unfortunately COVID got the best of us and we put most of our efforts on hold for the past year. And we've been trying to build a guiding coalition of other civic organizations like the Conservation Trust and the Centers for Culture and History and the Cultural Council. So the final chapter isn't written. We're still in the midst of this. Once COVID lets up, we intend to get back involved full speed ahead, and we'll either we'll either end up with an historic district or we'll go down trying. So that's really it. I'm happy to take any comments or questions or anything anybody would like to raise.
Ron, thank you. That was so interesting. I always love learning history, and you gave us a lot to learn. It's wonderful. And I'll be thinking about that a lot. I'm also distressed with the issues of demolition that you're dealing with, especially the Kenrick-Sparrow house, Kenrick House. And I know there's some questions in the chat room. So maybe we should take a look there, starting with, there was one, hold on, just here it comes. Couldn't the longhouse be moved? It's so small. Could that, is that a candidate for being moved? Has anybody shown any interest in doing that?
Nobody has shown any interest, and that is an approach. It's an approach that sounds good until you start to peel back the layers. You need to have a place to put it. And when you move, a big part of the historic value of a building is in its location. So you kind of diminish the historical value when you do move it. But it is an approach that is taken. We have considered it. We have in the past used the Cape Cod Commission's website to advertise the availability of houses for moving. The yellow house that used to exist right near the Staples Plaza on Route 6A. We had a couple of bites on that. People interested in potentially moving it, but it never happened. But, yes, that's an option that we certainly would consider. We had actually hired a consultant back in 2015 to evaluate the town for locations where historic homes that were about to be demolished could be moved. But it didn't come to fruition, but it is an option. If we
Would
could
you,
move that house.
would you consider making that, I mean, shouting that out beyond Orleans? I know someone in Chatham would like to have an old house moved onto her property, rather than having it demolished. I would love to see something like that moved. I know there's a lot of issues attached to it, but if people in Chatham knew that something was in jeopardy in Orleans, they might be interested in it. Though I know you'd like to keep it in Orleans, it's Orleans history. I'm just encouraging you to share that information beyond Orleans, and same for all the towns, to let people know what's happening somehow. I know you do, you work really hard at that. That would be great.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree fully. And the Cape Cod Commission website is Cape wide. That
Right, but I don't
certainly
think
is.
the average person is looking at that.
No, they're not.
If you're looking at newspapers or their PSAs on radio, or somehow get the information out. I think all need, I mean, Pop can help maybe do that as well, but this is really important that people find out what's going on and what the options are. You just never know, and it's worth it. We have another question, and it is from Sarge Slicer, and is there a map of the markers and historic houses?
There are some rudimentary, those are both projects that we're working on. There is the Cultural Council does have a map of downtown, of what was originally the cultural district in the village center. And that does include the location of the 8 markers that the Historical Commission placed in 2017, and the older ones. But we're looking to create a map of those 50 houses that were built before 1797, and a little brochure. We just got some CPC funding to support that.
Wow.
So
Fantastic. Yay, that'll be great. Sarge also asked about the status of the CPT Lionel House.
That was recently sold. The owners sold it, and according to the press, it's going to be used as a residence, not a
Wow.
restaurant, not an inn. That happens to be in the Old Kings Highway District, and they have some impressive powers to prevent things like demolition and inappropriate changes. So I feel kind of good about that.
Wow,
place.
that's a win. And it should be pronounced Linnell, right? I said it wrong.
I believe it is Linnell,
Linnell.
but that certainly is a very historic home that we certainly wouldn't want to lose.
Now, I know you fought the hard fight to save the Kenrick-Sparrow house, and it just, I mean, that one really tears me apart inside when I think about it. And I'm just wondering what bylaw could be written to prevent that from happening again? Is there any such bylaw you think we should be considering in all our towns?
Well, an historic district would do that, and an historic district does become a bylaw. And written appropriately, that would prevent demolition, or it wouldn't necessarily, it empowers the Historic District Commission to not approve an application to demolish. So that essentially is the ultimate approach. There are some other zoning approaches that we're looking at, but at least from the work that we've done so far, the historic district seems to be the most direct route to the kind of bylaw that you're discussing.
Well, you are, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all this and for your hard work and your passion that, Orleans is very blessed to have you a part of their system. Excuse me. And I want to just remind people that Orleans is just an example of what all the towns on the Cape and Islands are dealing with. Maybe other towns have historic districts. I know the Nantucket Island is an entire historic business district, and they're struggling seriously with the pressures of big money. Excuse me, sorry. So anything anybody wants to do to step up and help with this process, let me know, let Ron know, let's the more helping hands and minds, the better we can be at trying to slow down and stop the demolition of the historical charm of the Cape and Islands. And since I'm losing my voice, I think it's time to call it a night. I hope you all will join us back on May 13th when we have archaeologist Greg Chartier discussing his findings with his archaeological digs in Chatham and elsewhere. It's going to be very interesting. So just keep posted of what we're doing on our website, protectourpast.org. And I thank you all for being with us. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Very well done.
Thank you all very much.
Excellent job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, Ron.
Ron, I really enjoyed that, and nicely done.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.